Welcome in to the Energy Tech Podcast presented by Opsite Energy. Today, we will be discussing using data-driven insights and AI to understand the pipeline regulatory landscape. Guys, welcome to Canonsburg.
Hey, Jeff, it's good to be here. I am your co-host, Mike Flores with the Energy Tech Podcast. And I've got Daniel Nieto with me, our VP of Compliance. Daniel, we're here on the show, man. Glad to have you here with us.
Hey, guys. Great to be back on the show.
Yeah, we're glad to be here. And, you know, this is going to be a good topic. And the reason I say this is because we're going to cover some data. And we're really going to target the Railroad Commission data on audits. So everything we're talking about is Texas focused, but it applies to just about any part of the federal rule anyway. But we're just going to target this using data from the Texas Railroad Commission, who, as we know, implements or carries out the DOT FEMSA rules statewide, right?
Yes, that is correct. So definitely interesting to see this data. And again, this is just strictly focused on Texas.
So the Railroad Commission is an agent of the federal government.
Yeah,
and the way that works is basically they get grant money. I won't say grant money, but they get federal funds and to the tune of 50% of all their expenses, trucks, people, salaries, technology, etc. And then the Railroad Commission in Texas enforces the federal code on 192 and 195.
Awesome.
So some states that's not the case, right, Daniel? So just a little education there. So
yeah, that's correct.
Some cases, some states, the feds handle their audits, or they may handle the liquid audit and not the gas audit. So,
and you can actually go onto the FEMSA website and look at the regulatory facts. There's a fact sheet there that'll break down what agency does, whether it's FEMSA or the state agency that will actually do those audits.
Yeah, and that kind of came up with, by the time they wrote the federal rules back in the 70s, it was like, okay, great, now we got our rules. How do we enforce them? And that's kind of how most of those relationships were born. And most of the state agencies will say, heck yeah, we'll take that. 50% is a lot of money, and they'll go enforce your policy. So that's the way it's done in Texas. But you're right, Mike. Different states, different databases, et cetera. But in most cases, it's pretty easy to pull this public data like you did. So
we're going to talk about that, how we did that. And so what can you expect right now on this show? I think, again, what we're going to talk about is because we've got Daniel's expertise with us, we're going to target how Opsite Energy leverages AI to actually scrape data and determine what some of these control room violations and audits actually bring to light. That really helps us because it can drive training. It can make you proactive. So that's one of the key things. When we use data, we really mean insight-driven remote ops. We mean that we're going to take insights that's going to drive things that we do for clients and for the community, right?
Yes.
So pay attention. This is going to be a really good series. Really good topic right now. And it's good to have Daniel because we're going to lend a little expertise on this when we talk about it. All right. And so one of the first things I did was we start with our base data. So I'm going to share my screen because I really want you to understand what we're doing here right now. And again, this is Texas-based, and there's lots of pipeline operators in Texas. Again, you can take what you learn here and carry this over with any state, really, because a lot of the same federal rules apply. It's just about looking at data, right, and driving this home. So with that, Jeff, let's kind of share the screen a bit. All right, here's what I got. So I'm using a tool called VZero. If you don't know, it is an AI tool that allows you to build quick applications, dashboards, just about anything from cloning websites to creating simple apps that you can actually take and deploy. So in this case, I scraped data from the Texas Railroad Commission pipeline control room violation. Now, I'm going to go where that's at, okay? And I want you to see. So you have raw data that comes in from these inspections. I won't share too many of these company names. I'm sure, they're not happy if they see them, but you have actually columns that give you a specific ID. They tell you a date. They have an end date of these inspections, and then you'll have where they break out into specialized pipeline safety data. And you can actually dive right into an organization, and inside of that, you can pick up the violations. There's other information that I don't agree with that they have, such as names and phone numbers. But at the same time, it does tell you who was involved in the audit, what company it was, and what data comes out of it. So from there, what I do is I work with a tool called GenSpark.ai, and we parse the data using a large language model that allows you to data scrape. You can do the same thing with that and another tool that I use called Amplify. So Amplify allows you to scrape data from any site, and then what you can do is you can take that data, parse it, and create columns, all with the use of a large language model, right? And so what it does at the end of this is give us a beautiful dashboard using a few tools. What did I say? We take it from the original site. We look at the data link, and I really just copied the link over, dropped it into GenSpark, into Amplify, using an actor for a scraper, and then I create a complete set of data. And again, I don't want to give away too many names, but if you really look at this, I want to concentrate on a few things we're going to target. When we talk about the data, we want to talk about the inspection date that this happened, and then we're going to talk about the alleged violation that came in from that producer during that time frame. The data we're talking about is 2024 and 2025. We have up through September already, so these records do come in. And you can actually use tools like Amplify or GenSpark.ai and others. There's others like make.com and N8N. But what you can do is you can create scrapers that do this in every second, every minute, every day, at the end of the week, whatever your choice is. And we can pull in the actual inspection date. We can do the alleged violation. But what's also interesting is you can create a sentiment analysis using the executive closing violation text. So at the end of this, the state typically puts out a letter, and it tells you what the violation was in a summary. And so this is their actual executive closing. You can, again, find this at FEMSA, right, Daniel? I think you can find it in both the state rule, the state piece, as well as on the FEMSA website. You can do the same thing. But for the sake of this episode, we're targeting Texas. So what did I do? We scrape the data. Once we do that with the tool, then we organize it. And with GenSpark, you actually have an AI super agent that is just like Excel. And then we parse this data out. From there, you can have N8N or make.com drop it into VZero. And we can take the data, and now we can create what I consider to be just a beautiful looking or an easy to present dashboard that you can build using the same data, which is what we did here. And so what do we have? Well, let's talk through this, Daniel, just to give people an idea. From that, we were able to push at least 80 different lines of inspection records to analyze. We have 15 operators, okay? So they've been anonymized, meaning I removed their names just because maybe we don't want these majors and such beyond with their names on there. But this is going to give us a really good idea of the number of operators. And this is over an 18-month period. That's 12 months in 2024 plus half the year in 2025.
Right.
Okay. So the next thing is it says we've got distinct violations. So that means that we were able to parse out the data and look at 10 distinct violations that saw a pattern. So when you leverage tools in AI, what you're looking for is a sentiment analysis to parse out the data and actually break down those distinct violations along with the violation code. Next is kind of just some quick findings that we saw. We're going to talk through these, Daniel. One of these is like at least 73% of them are procedure-based. The other 27% are observation-based. And then you have these top 5 operators that account for 62% of violations that came in on all 18 months. So these top 5, and it's usually because they have large control rooms. So I want to make sure you know that. These top 5. And then one of the things that came out most in the sentiment analysis of the data was the most cited deficiency was the controller training. So Daniel, knowing just this information as an expert, kind of tell us what is the difference between a procedural-based violation, maybe an observation, and there's a third, right?
Yeah, so you have your records, right? So procedure is do you have something written that you're following, and are you trained on it, right?
Right.
And then you have your records for that, whether it's a part of training for someone to review, or changes that are made, revision logs, things like that. And then you have your observation, right? So when you go into a control room audit, they want to go and speak to a controller. They want to see where these documents are being placed, and does the controller know where to find them. They want to see what the controller's looking at, right? As far as screens, because you are talking about alarm management and the protocol. You're talking about configurations from the SCADA, from displays, your alarming and how that's done and how it's presented to the controller. They can ask for a database, right? So you'll be able to show them that, but they actually want to see it in your SCADA system. They want to interview a controller. So that's where the observation comes in.
Yeah. So Jeff, let's go back to the screen for a second here. If you really looked at, let's just start with 2024 data, okay? So Daniel, you mentioned here, again, we parsed this out to kind of look at the total violations. We're going to target 8 of these over this number of operators for 2024 data. So we had 8 operators that were cited in 2024, right? 2 of them were at least for SCADA alarm management, right? That was the top category, and the busiest peak period for these types of audits was in May. That's where you saw the peak time in terms of the dates. But just like you talked about just a second ago, Daniel, when you look at the evidence types, you see 50% of them were actually violations related to their procedure, right? And so you gave a really good description on procedural. None of them were observed in 2024. The majority of those were in 2025's data set. And then 50% were records-based. So you had an even split between procedure and, of course, records. And I think those are tied because you have procedures that were in violation. They didn't have them, and they couldn't produce the record, right? So I think that's why you see that kind of even split.
Yeah, that can occur. I mean, there's definitely a lot of different things as far as what could happen. It's really depending on the operator, what they're producing. It could be anything from, showing a deviation based off of, a shift change, or being able to produce a shift change, or being able to produce the documentation of training that was associated with a new controller or a new asset that was being brought on, point-to-point documentation.
Yeah. And so, I think what you're basically saying is, hey, there was that split that we talked about. And, in your mind, let me ask you this, Daniel, when you, in your mindset, if you're preparing for an audit, how do you create maybe a rule of thumb for each one of these when you're talking about observation, procedures? I mean, obviously, it's hard to do it for observation because you're really it's a mindset, right? If you want an operator to give a good response, that's only tied to the fact that they have a good mindset on their shift, right?
Right. And the way to look at it is even observation could be tied into it. You can kind of look at what you do from onboarding your new controller. Are they aware where the procedures are? Do they know that there's a CRM? Do they know what their roles and responsibilities are? That's what all the observations are when you look at it. Do they know what alarm management is, and how that's being rationalized and what that response is? So from the observation portion of it, I mean, you tie that into training and how you're implementing your plans, your procedures. And then just from, the record standpoint, your record is based off your procedure and your plans.
Yes.
Right. So when you're implementing something, you have to train these controllers on what their responsibility is and what they're responsible for.
Right.
Ultimately, it's, all these are all kind of broken out, and it's I've seen audits where, they want to interview the controller, and I've seen where, people are a little concerned about that, and it's I don't understand why they would be concerned. because they're trained on this every year. When you're when you're bringing on a new controller, training,
right,
and when you're also evaluating your effectiveness of your own training, these should be hit, right? So there should be no concern or anything regarding a controller being interviewed.
Yeah. So let's, I think let's look at kind of this distribution again on the screen here. So then again, this is 2024. We're going to look at 25 in just a minute, but one of the things you alluded to, which is tying back controller training, amounted to 25% of those distribution on violations. And then you had the SCADA and alarm management, which is another percentage, right? And then you had some compliance that was in there. Fatigue management had another violation, and then, of course, leak detection procedure, right? So when you're really looking at those top regulatory citations, looking into 2024 only, you're looking at that documentation issue, right, with certain reporting. You had specific controller training, which dominates the 2024 data, along with alarm procedures responses, right? And so this all ties back to what you're talking about, which is in the observation, but more than anything, it is a mindset that happens in the control room.
Correct.
And when there's more, because you can dive into different profiles. I decided not to dive a little too deep because I don't think we have a whole lot of time. But what we could do is take the sentiment from each of those final reviews. When we go back and we look at the data and we really take apart what is being said in the actual executive summary or in the summary that they issue to each operator, you can really take that and create that sentiment analysis to really give you an idea of what they're at high risk for. So you have a risk of, hey, they have high violations in terms of their observations, right? Sitting down and actually having an operator that can articulate their procedure and can articulate their policy, right? And actually is doing it. There might be some for procedures that are they're documentation focused, they're low risk, they have different elements in their policy, right? So I guess what I'm saying is that you can really take those and drive a conversation or drive data to help your own control room understand what you're trying to get better at, right? So if I went to the 2025 data, that was actually more violation in that year than there was in 2024. And those were 10 operators that were cited, so there was 2 more than the previous year. SCADA alarms was a top category, right? And then, of course, the peak period was in September. You had more audits during that time period. And when you really break that one down, you have the 40%, which is procedure-based. Observation was only 10%. So you really saw, I wouldn't say it was an improvement in terms of procedure, but again, I guess a little more observation going into the next year, right?
Yeah, and some of that procedure could be things not written very well or written at all.
Yeah.
So they can have, one of the biggest things is fatigue, right? We're talking about that. You spend a lot of time on that. Alarm management. You may not have countermeasures in there.
Yeah.
Identified correctly. So there's, could be certain areas that need to be updated. And then along with the, training as well. I mean, there's several sections that you feel like, you can have a pretty good documentation. Then you go into it and you realize that if you're not hitting every one of these items, and again, there are some considerations out there, especially with the Railroad Commission. They'll guide you, and this is basically the FAQs, right?
Yeah.
So you can take the FAQs, look at them, and see where they're kind of giving you that guidance, and at the same time, that's where the clarification comes into play. When you're with them and you're speaking with those auditors, and you can get that from them at that time.
Right. So if you're trying to have a successful audit, it sounds to me like what what you're saying is that you really want to take those categories from 1168. It sounds like step back and really take a look at what you're doing in your control room, right? Is that kind of what you're alluding to?
Yes. The biggest part of it is really knowing your plan, right? And really getting feedback from your operations folks. When you're doing your reviews, you make sure you have the right people at the table when you're speaking.
Yeah.
Right. You want to make sure that you have if you have a controller there,
right.
If you have a lead controller, get feedback, on the actual plan and, how you can enhance it.
Yeah.
Right. Or a supervisor, manager. It should include everyone in that package and honest feedback, trying to, make sure that the next person coming in or just enhancing your own program.
Yes.
And a lot of that is not really being done sometimes. It's kind of, you have executive people in these meetings or compliance people in these meetings not really doing a deeper dive and looking at the training and bringing the right people to the table.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, just your own experience, Daniel, it sounds like one of the things that you like to do is engage the right operational folks and not acting as a consultant. You prefer to actually dive into what's really transpiring between operations groups and connecting the dots between them and the control room. And that's when you're going to get really well-written procedure, really good documentation, and really good proof of what you're implementing when you understand the plan, right?
Yeah. So when the way I always looked at it is if you're writing a procedure from a controller, right, and you hand this to a controller, and if he's qualified for this desk, you should be able to, especially if he's taking action, he should be able to click on the screen and be able to follow what that procedure states for him to do.
Yeah.
And before things are rolled out or implemented, that training should take place. You should be looking at normal operations and what this looks like at a normal state. And if you had to shut down, there's things that you need to provide to your controller, who they're calling. So there's definitely a lot to bring to the table and making sure that when you're rolling out these new, and that's where maybe sometimes a step is missed. It could be not enough information for the auditor when they're coming in. And again, you want to be prepared, right? So everything should be documented well.
Yes.
Because you may not remember what you did tomorrow.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that. It should be documented well. Let's look at the screen one more time. So here you're looking at a violation distribution. If you look at 2025 data, you're going to see almost a doubling of the total number of violations that came in over the same period in 2025. So you had a slight increase, but one of the things that you notice is SCADA and alarm management was a little bit of an increase, but now you had emergency procedures that came into play. Leak detection system, but mostly emergency procedures is new. You didn't see that in the previous year, so now there's really an attention paid to what you're talking about, which is your procedures, your controller training, and of course, any procedural stuff that came out of fatigue management. So I think that hits home to your point about that. And then you can look and see the documentation that was incomplete. Look at that. So while the other ones were one, okay, so you have two, but still, at the end of the day, that's still a doubling of the total number of controller training documentation that was incomplete. Leads back to exactly what you're saying in terms of documentation, right?
Yeah, and that could vary, right? It could be from information not being completed correctly, and you have to remember any document that's presented, it should be filled in correctly. So if you have, where you're having to put a date, a name, if it's not, filled in correctly or filled in at all, it's an incomplete document.
Yeah.
Right. So whoever's reviewing this documentation, whether it's from, the trainer side of it,
yeah,
you have to ensure that that documentation is correct.
Yeah.
And either from the supervisor or lead controller that's above him, making sure that's correct, right? Yeah, that's a part of their responsibility when you're looking at things. So
Daniel, what was always your rule of thumb? I mean, a lot of times, people want to write a procedure. It's boring. And now with AI, I tend to believe that, people want to just dump something in there and hopefully they have something that's well written, right? And again, they might have 80% chat GPT, 20% their own sweat, right? And so, I'm pushing out caution here. Would you agree that, hey, maybe a little that's caution? You really need to be not just implementing a procedure, but there needs to be a review process?
yes, there has to be a review process. You need to sit with your operations folks to make sure that you're covering every element that needs to be covered when you're rolling out these procedures. Training needs to take place. You're reviewing your screens, making sure that everything during a point-to-point is going well and it's well documented.
Right.
You're looking at descriptors. And again, people tend to forget that you have local HMI, right? So whatever you're calling that equipment at that level,
Yeah.
should go all the way to the control room and what you're seeing.
Right.
I've seen too many times where they're calling it, one thing here and something else on the other side, and you have to make those corrections. But it starts with your plan and people knowing the plan, people
Yes.
knowing what, how it should be created, documented, and reviewed. From the very beginning, from a management of change, right? When someone's submitting, there should be some type of, all right, we've identified that this is what we're going to name this tag and
Right.
how we're going to display it, and when you're rolling it out with a point-to-point or any other operations, again, it's all from procedure standpoint. So from the local HMI all the way up to testing, displaying, training, and rolling out, all those things should be covered. And sometimes it could be missed.
Yeah. And, I think, Daniel, that what I'm hearing is there's a couple of things here. Number one is you really, again, have to step back and take a look at your program, make sure you know your plan. And that needs to be effective. And then have that backup and make sure that the documentation's in place and that it's, there really is a mindset behind all of this. And you have to have your operators on board with that type of mindset. And anybody that interacts with the control room has to have that same mindset in working with control room operators, especially if they're in the field and you're conducting like management of change, or you need to do a point-to-point if you've changed, equipment types or whatever the case is, right?
Yes, and the biggest part of this is accountability, right, from every operations group, right? There has to be some type of accountability. Anyone that's writing a procedure, right, and these groups should be explaining how the program is being written, so that could be documented.
Right.
You should be able to hand an experienced controller a documentation and them have, just being able to pick this up and really run through it and understanding that operations. If they're familiar with it, getting trained on it, it's going to fall in line, So anytime they're rolling any of these documents out, they should be clicking on the screen, checking, making sure if you're stating that this is a part of my step, do I have the capability to click on this?
Yeah.
Do I have control over this? And that should all be done before it's rolled out.
Yeah.
Not discovered afterwards and things like that. So, yes, if you're going to use any type of language, AI type of stuff, that's whatever works, right? So I'm not saying not to. What like you said, the caution, right?
Sure.
You should be reviewing all of these items with your operations folks, your engineers, making sure if you're a third-party service, making sure that you have the right people at the table that you can interact with to ensure that you're capturing all the information.
Yes.
And then rolling that out to your controllers for training, making sure that if there's any questions that we're answering them, your point of contacts, what you're controlling. Is there leak detection on this system?
Yeah.
How is this leak detection working? Is it mass balance? Is it some type of leak detection system like, Atmos or...
Yeah, computational balance and so on. Yeah, absolutely. So with that, Daniel, I want to say something here, and that is that right here at Opsite, the Opsite Energy group, has a way to help the community. If you would like to understand tools that you can leverage in terms of AI tools, both at the enterprise level and locally, put the questions out there, reach out to us. So we've combined two things here that I want to mention is, number one is the ability to use an AI tool only to leverage the data to give you some insight, right? It's not going to write your program. Let's be realistic. What we're not saying is do that, but it can help you understand where FEMSA is going. You can also look at FAQs that are most recent. You can actually build AI tools that'll grab those RSS feeds and actually collect that data to help you understand and create a trend and pattern that you can look at to improve your procedures. The second thing is we have the in-house expertise. So Daniel, it's always good to have you on the show. And that is one thing I want to mention. So anytime you catch our episode, ask the questions, like and subscribe to us, and we would gladly share how we leverage any sort of AI tool to create a data-driven decision that'll help you with your CRM program. And with that, Daniel, I appreciate the expertise, and you can like and subscribe, catch us for more. I want to put a plug in for our CRM series that you need to be looking out for as part of the Energy Tech Podcast, our CRM series that targets control room management. And again, I am your co-host, Mike Flores, and glad to have Jeff in the booth and Daniel Nieto right here with us, our VP of Compliance. Great episode. Thanks. Thank you, Daniel.